Hello, my dear friends. This is Kristina Mandakiani, co-founder of Mindvalley and the host of Mindvalley Book Club, and welcome to our weekly interviews. And today I have a very interesting conversation topic, especially in light of everything that's happening in the US, but maybe we won't be political, I have no idea. Although if we are, well, forgive us. You know me. So today I have a guest, Brigit Schulte. Welcome, Brigit, Schulte. I pronounce you German way. I promised to pronounce it the American way, but I failed. But Brigid, welcome to Mindvalley.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your book. It is a very exciting book, but first I'll introduce my guest officially, and then we'll talk about the book. I do want to invite you to say hi in the chat, and maybe where you're from. I'm in Estonia, as usual, and believe my guest must be in US, but I'm not 100% sure, but I suppose so.
Yes. I'm right outside of Washington, D.C., where all the action is happening.
Oh my, oh my.
Yes, oh my is right. Oh my.
So, my guest today, Brigit Schulte, is an award-winning journalist and, of course, a speaker and an author. In fact, New York Times bestselling author of the book Overwhelmed, which came out earlier. Although today we're talking about Brigit's newest book, Overwork, which is in a similar topic, probably covering some of the similar ideas. But in essence, we're going to talk about how our current contemporary hustle work culture is actually killing us, literally. And we are going to focus, of course, on the American work culture because it is an example for a lot of us in the outside world, mostly thanks to entertainment and Hollywood movies. So we kind of know a little bit. And also a lot of Mindvalley audience, of course, is in the US. So if you're in the US, you can say hi. I know US is just waking up, not waking up, waking up. And a lot of our live guests are from the rest of the world, but it is still interesting. I think we also have our issues which we need to fix. So I actually dropped, because the conversation is so exciting, I dropped the bio accidentally. I also wanted to say that Brigid is the director of Better Life Labs and the host of the Better Life Labs podcast. And also she was a journalist for let me just check, the Washington Post and the Washington Post magazine. And in 2008 was part of the team who won Pulitzer Prize. For me, it's literally like, wow. And her work has been featured in a lot of very established media, such as the New York Times, the Atlantic, Harvard Business Review, Financial Times, The Guardian, Fast Company, and much more. So that's a short introduction. Brigid, just add if there's something which is important, maybe in connection to our topic, which I have not mentioned.
Well, I think probably one of the most important things is that I'm a mother of two. And so a big part of the book that I really talk about is how work needs to change to make room for care, and that we need to think about work itself in a much bigger way, and that it's not just what we do for pay, but it's also all of the unpaid work of care and home. All of that is work, and all of that should be recognized. So my identity as a mother and as a caregiver and as a carer is also a very big part of my identity.
That's so true. And actually, it did catch my eye at the very beginning when you did the introduction to the book where you said, I love my work. And then you named a lot of things, which I also love. And actually relate very much to that. But first, let me show you the cover of the book. If you haven't got it yet, do get it. It's a very interesting read. I have to confess that while reading books professionally, I particularly enjoy reading books by people who are professional writers. You can tell that. It's like they suck you up and then you can't stop reading. I actually had to discipline myself so that I don't miss this interview because I'm reading the book. So thank you so much. This is a very, apart from it being a good read, of course, it covers a lot of very important topics in everybody's life because most of us are working, especially our audience. Everybody has some kind of job profession or maybe the thing of the passion that is the most important occupation in their life. So we are all professional people in one way or another, but a lot of us also have families and care responsibilities. Now, when you said that you're a mother of two, and that's a very important thing, it literally made me think of the last year in my own life because we are moving to London, and I had to spend a lot of time going with my daughter to London to attend school exams, open days in schools, interviews. It took a lot of time because we live in Estonia, so flying to London and doing it for 5 schools. I have actually put my life on hold last year. I have been doing interviews in book club, but I haven't been on stage, I haven't spoken. That took priority, and it was a roller coaster, emotionally speaking, as well, because as much as I love my children, this realization that you're missing out and you're comparing yourself to some hypothetical person out there who is not failing the professional side is still there, no matter how progressively you might think about yourself. So thank you for bringing it up, because it is an important part of not just women's lives, I believe.
Oh, it's really, when you think about it, and it's not just, it's not just people with care responsibilities for others. We're human beings. We're not robots. We have to care for ourselves. So in the largest sense, we're all caregivers, because, we get sick and we need to rest and we need to take care of ourselves. So when I think about workers with care responsibilities, that's everybody, whether you're caring for someone else or yourself. And I guess, it pains me to hear you describe the last year of your life, but that is the way that we're conditioned to think, that somehow if we're not doing our paid work, that we're not keeping up, that we're failing, and that there are other people who are sort of getting ahead. And that's a lot of the mindset that I wanted to really explore and understand and sort of challenge in the book. Because if we realize and understand that our unpaid work, that care work, is just as valuable, is just as important, deserves time and attention. And not just for women. I think this is another thing that's really important, is that we tend to think that those care responsibilities are something that women do or should do or are better at. And they're really human beings. We only survived from the early ages because we cooperated with one another. All human beings care for others, that is an essential part of our nature. And so a lot of what I'm trying to do is push back against the paid work only, hustle culture, work first, that is somehow identifies you as successful. Because there are a lot of people who put a lot of time and energy into their paid work, into money, and are really unhappy, miserable, lonely people. And
Yeah.
so what I'm really trying to do, I would say both of my books are really a search for the good life, for a quality of life. And how can we make that available to all people across race and class and gender? Because right now, it really favors the privileged few. And so a lot of my work at the Better Life Lab, the writing that I do, the books that I write, is really about like opening up that conversation. How can we all have access to the good life?
And I agree, because this part of my life, which put my professional life on hold, was very satisfying. Some of the best memories of last year, by the way.
Right. Right. I mean,
Yes.
when you think about it, it's like, that's why I'm sort of challenging all of us to think bigger about our lives. They'll always say, like, at the end of your life, when you're laying on your deathbed, nobody ever wished they'd spent more time at the office. And so value that time, even when you're in it, even when it feels uncomfortable. I completely understand. There was my son was having some health challenges, and I was spending an awful lot of time going to doctors, and I wasn't working on my book, and I wasn't spending as much time at work. And I understand that tension and that anxiety, but that's when you have to breathe, because at the end of your life, spending that time with the people you love, caring for yourselves, caring for other people, that's what gives so much of our lives meaning.
So in your book, and I actually wanted to come to that topic a little later, because it's probably one of the most touching parts of the book for me, about the care work, because I have been thinking about that a lot lately. But since we're already on this topic, you mentioned in the book that a lot depends on the stories that we believe in. And I would like you to maybe open this idea, because the reality is that even if you understand somewhere deep inside that you're enjoying this time, but the stories, the prevalent stories in our society are telling us something else. So it is not surprising that we start doubting, is that the right choice, that I am prioritizing my family, for example, over my profession?
So I think that was one of the things that really struck me the most in my reporting. You talk about the first book is overwhelmed, work, love, and play when no one has the time. And that was very much an exploration about my own experience, trying to work as at the Washington Post as at a very high level as a journalist, trying to be a mother of two young children, and really feeling like I was just coming apart at the seams, like I wasn't doing anything well, and trying to understand that time pressure. And at the end of that book, I was so convinced that so much of the overwhelm and that sense of inadequacy came from the way we think about work, the way we've organized, and the stories we tell around work and its importance in our lives. And so that's really the quest in this book. I wanted to try to understand, well, what do we think about work and why? And I think that's one of the things that struck me the most. I didn't know the answers when I started reporting this book. I think that's what's so exciting about both of the books, is that it's an opportunity for me to go on a journey and really use my skills as a reporter to, like, why is it like this? Could it be different? Is there any place doing it better? And what could we learn? And I think what I learned that was so surprising is the power of mindset and the power of what we think. When we talk about hustle culture, and I'm just thinking about, right now with all of this pressure, you see the headlines, return to office and come back to work 5 days a week, and flexibility doesn't work. And we need to have you, I need to see you and be seated and like button a
Yeah.
chair for me to know that you're productive. All of that is not only untrue, the evidence shows that that's completely false. But the reason why it's so powerful and the reason why it's being pushed is because that's what leaders believe. And I thought that that was really one of the most, I don't know, shocking and profound things. Because you would think a business leader, you're driven by evidence, you're driven by data, you're driven by, the bottom line and wanting to have effective, profitable work. And that's what's so shocking, is that that's not what drives a lot of people. A
Hmm.
lot of what drives a lot of leaders is, well, I worked this way and I succeeded. And so you should too. And it's all about what they're comfortable with. It's all about what they believe. And I think one of the books that I read that was very influential, as I was thinking about this book and trying to figure out figure out how to report it and what I wanted to say, I read a book called The Story of Work. It's by a Dutch historian named Jan Lucassen.
Yeah.
And what I loved about that, he looked at the history of work, like how have we worked throughout, kind of, from prehistory to the modern day. And I think one of the most powerful things he said is that, there's never been one right way to work. We have organized work in an infinite number of ways. And I think
Hmm.
that's the message that I really want the book to show, is that there is no one right way to do it. And that work can be, it can be arranged in a number of different ways. And so all of this, I want to push back against this sort of status quo thinking that work has to look a certain way, because I think during COVID, we proved that it doesn't. And I think that's
Hmm.
where you get so much of this tension between leaders who want that, kind of have that mindset that I believe you need to be back. I believe that work needs to look a certain way. And all sorts of people who have shown that they have been productive and innovative and, have really prioritized work and done it well, and had time for their lives, and had time to have dinner with their families, and, care for their children or care for their aging parents.
Hmm.
We've shown that we can do it. And so I think I have great hope that there's a lot of resistance to some of that leadership, kind of mindset rigidity. And I think
Hmm.
the last thing I want to say about that is there's a lot of headlines, and you see it like the Trump administration wants people to come back to the office. And, some of the big companies are asking people to come back or mandating that they come back in various ways. But there's research that shows, out of Stanford, and there's others who really track the data. The majority of people in the United States, the majority of organizations are sticking with a kind of experimental hybrid type of work. So I think I
Hmm.
want people to understand that it's not like there's some big cabal saying we're going to snap back to 2019. It's more complicated than that. So if people
Hmm.
are resisting, I want you to know you're not alone. That there are, most people are settling in to, if you can, into a hybrid style of work. And then when you can't, when you have, sometimes you can have location flexibility. Like today, I'm working in my home office. I have that opportunity. But if you're a nurse or a police
Mhm.
officer, or you've got to like be in a place, or you're a retail worker or a factory worker, there are other ways to bring flexibility and control into your life. You can have
Mhm.
time flexibility. You can have different start and stop times. And so I think that's what I want people to understand, is that there's a way to make work work for everybody, regardless of whether you're a professional or an hourly worker.
Mm. I like this idea that you shared from Lucason's observation that it's actually the society who came up with how we work, and this pattern has changed over time, because that is actually a very sobering kind of realization, because we take it as the system as something given, as if it's a natural law and that's how it's supposed to be. But in reality, some people just a little bit before us came up with that system, and we just follow it. Now, I understand that, because when you work in US, a lot of the decisions are in the hands of the employers and the businesses. But if we balance a little bit on the border of two topics, the care responsibilities and the efficiency, the fact that a happy employee is more productive is already being promoted, and this is what business owners would listen to. Yeah, okay, I'll give you that because I want you to work and I want you to be productive. But on the other hand, care responsibilities also have a price tag. I used to live in Asia for 16 years, and a lot of the care responsibilities, we kind of bought the time of other people to do them for us, whether it's, caretaking, cleaning, cooking. And that is something which obviously businesses would not care about. So, as a society, as a modern society, is there any movement towards actually recognizing the price tag of all that, those hours of work that women and men do after work?
It is such a good question. And I really feel like, all of these future of work conversations, and we're so stuck on AI and robots and oh my God. And that is legitimate. We do need to be thinking about that. But to me, these are the questions to be thinking about in the future of work. You talk about how we outsource. We have nannies, and we have care workers, and cleaners. That has enabled. That was a lot of the work that was done by women traditionally, and that has enabled women to go and do other things. To have other opportunities. But at the same time, those jobs that take place of what had been considered a quote unquote labor of love, a lot of those are very poorly paid. They're
Yeah.
invisible. The people aren't treated very well. You don't have decent pay or decent hours. So to me, that's the question really of the next sort of the future of work.
Mm.
How do we make all of those jobs recognize the value of the work that they're doing? Um, eh, you know, you, I just, oh my goodness, I'm sorry. I write a lot about care, and when you talk to professional care workers, at care educators in early childhood, or home care workers taking care of, disabled, aging, or elderly people, they love what they do. They love the people they work with. They feel like this passion and dedication. But that does not mean that we should exploit them. It is
Mm.
not fair that someone spends their heart to like take care of other people and then they can't pay their own bills. And we need care workers, in the United States alone, because we're an aging society like many others. Home care workers are predicted to be the largest profession in the economy, and they earn
Mm.
about maybe 13 bucks an hour. How can
Mhm.
the United States be the wealthiest country on earth as measured by GDP and have the largest profession not even be able to take care of their own bills or their own, I talk to people who work 7 days a week and can't imagine ever retiring. So this
Mhm.
is really the question. And there are good examples of what we can do to solve that. I write about one in the book. Washington State, they saw how they had an aging population, and they saw how, the home care jobs were so terrible that there was a lot of turnover. And when there's a lot of turnover, you don't really get high quality because people don't know the people they need to care for. And they were spending a lot of money. Medicaid is something that covers home care services, at least now. It's under threat now with the new administration and the Republican controlled
Mhm.
Congress who want to cut all of this. They want families to thrive. I'm not sure how families will thrive without care and healthcare and food, but that's another question. But what the state of Washington did is they were very creative. They worked with private industry, they worked with unions, kind of worker power, and they worked with government, sort of the three legs, if you will, of what had been a social contract here in the United States. They came up with a system to make care jobs better jobs that paid well, that had benefits. Washington State is one of the few that has a paid family medical leave program. The United States, as I talk about employers have so much power here because we don't have a lot of the policy guardrails that other countries do. We're really the only one that does not even have paid maternity leave, much less paid family leave. We don't have paid sick days on a national scale. So they came together and they solved the problem. And now you've got a much more stable home and, home care workers. You've got much better care. And so instead of people getting so sick that they need to go into nursing homes where they don't want to be and it's more expensive, they're able to stay at home and live, kind of live a dignified life. And so that's sort of a win-win-win all around. So there are ways that we can solve it. And I think that's what's exciting. We just need to think sort of outside the box sometimes.
Well, systems like that are a little hard to break, I believe. There was a quote, if I find it, that I wrote out that I wanted to just, yes. While other countries have safety nets, the United States has mothers and caregivers. That's from your book. And I found it very significant because I'm from one of those other countries. Now, maybe I'll ask a question which is a little bit bordering on the political, but I think it's fine. So a lot of the times when I talk to American entrepreneurs, they are very black and white when it comes to pragmatic, business goals. That the society is better if the businesses are doing well, and businesses are doing well when they take employees as just one more resource, and who cares about what happens to you in your private life. Yet you also talk about the so-called burdens in your book, or the people who are burdensome for the economy because they cannot be maybe fit into productive work. But a lot of that is not possible to lay on the shoulders of the businesses because sometimes there is no business incentive in supporting your elderly population, for example. So, and you also mentioned that Nixon, for example, was very much against any kind of social policies because they equated it to the Soviet system, which now obviously is a little bit old-fashioned way of looking at things. So how do you think it's possible, at least in the US, to break that paradigm that supporting the weak is inefficient for the society, that this is something that came from the communism and that should be avoided as a plague? Well, sorry, it came out very political. I'm sorry.
No, that's quite all right. That's quite all right. And so what you're talking about is something that I've written about in both books, which is, in the early 70s, when women started to go into the paid workforce en masse around the world for a variety of different reasons. Some of it is because opportunities opened up, and some of it is because in the United States, good jobs started to kind of disappear, if you will, go overseas. Wages started to stagnate. So you needed that second income just to be able to survive. That's a lot of what drove women into the workforce. There's been good work, good academic work that shows that if women had not entered the workforce in the 1970s, far more families would have fallen into poverty. So, there has been sort of stigma against working mothers for the longest time, sort of like blaming them as sort of selfish. And I think that's an important sort of corrective for people to understand. It's like a lot of it was out of necessity for families. But that said, at the time, as women were entering the workforce, there were these conversations around the world, like, okay, well, how can we support families? How can we help them? And a number of countries decided to invest in care infrastructure, in really good early care and learning that would be affordable for families, that would be high quality, that would require sort of like public school, public education, that would require public investment, because there was a recognition that no family could pay as much as care would cost. We got to that point as well in the United States. We had a bill that passed both House and Senate, and was bipartisan, which I think would freak people out these days. And you're right, Nixon vetoed it. sort of with this fear that somehow childcare was like sending children into a factory, you know, and would be antithetical to like, you know, American family values. And that was such a, it was such a disgrace, really, because what that did then is it created a system, which is what we have now, which is families are expected to pay for most of childcare, and most really can't afford it. Childcare costs more than in-state college tuition in more than 30 states. It costs as much or more as your rent or mortgage in many states. So it's really expensive for families. And the reason it's expensive is that it takes a lot of people to do. And people earn poverty wages because the providers know they can't pay their workers what they're worth and charge families for it. And then there are government subsidies to help the very, very poor, but only 1 in 6 children that are eligible actually get them because there's not enough money. So it's a patchwork system that really isn't working well for anyone. And we really saw that during COVID, how it really fell apart. And businesses recognized, like, I can't run a business if if my workers don't have, you know, stable childcare. You know, if they're calling in because they don't have childcare, and then I don't have somebody to work this shift. So there is more conversation around how do we fix it. And so part of what I'm arguing, we argue at the Better Life Lab, is we need to think about care and early care and learning. First of all, paid leave is infant care. Most families want to take care of their own infants when they're little rather than, you know, go off to work. Most families, if you look at surveys, that's what they want. So we could use more investment and think about early care and learning like we do public education, where it's a common good. It's like a library, it's like a park, it's like a public school. And we pool our resources and we invest together because we recognize it's part of what makes our communities better and stronger. So I think there is a way to communicate that. It's just there's an awful lot of noise that.
It's, as far as I know from psychology, the first years of child's development are so crucial. And actually, that what you just said, that paid leave is in essence infant care, and that is something which in the end, like in the long run, will influence how how well developed that individual is. So. Sorry, I just find everything so exciting, but I have to check the time so that we don't overspeak. Oh no, we still have time. So what I wanted to start this interview with, and we are only just now getting there.
I'm sorry, I need to talk about work more. I know I've been talking about the system and care.
No.
Talk about work.
It's very important because this is also work, and it is what on everybody's mind, whether we like it or not. And even if you worry about your career, you still worry about that. And the anxiety probably comes from the lack of reconciliation between the two worlds. But I did want to ask you about the statements that you made in the very beginning of your book, that overwork does, in essence, kill people. And there was some statistics which I also wrote out, but my iPad just died. But I'll do it by memory. That 20% of deaths are now caused by overwork-related health issues.
Yeah, so this is, so I would say sort of the first question that I began to look at in the book is, you know, in the United States, we have this culture that values working all the time. You know, if you're in an office, in many organizations, if you come in early and you stay late and you work through your lunch, you're seen as the best worker, the ideal worker. You know, there's surveys that show that leaders think that the best ideal worker has no care responsibilities. So you can just dedicate yourself, body, soul, and mind to your job. And we see that they tend to get promoted more, they're rewarded. And so I began to wonder, well, do you really need to work that way? Because that will always disadvantage people with care responsibilities or people who just want to live full lives. You know, do we really have to be these, work devoted people? Is that the best way to work? And so I will tell you, the cliff notes of the book is no, it's actually the worst way to work. That honestly, what ends up happening is if that's the culture that you create, this sort of like, work first culture, what you end up doing is maybe even inadvertently, you create a busyness culture. because you want to look busy if you know that's what the boss rewards. And so you'll do a whole lot of busy work, sort of like that old saying, everyone's busy, no one's productive. And I saw that in some of the research that we did. We were going into nonprofits, which are famously overworked. And asking people, we wanted to try to understand, well, what drives your overwork and why are you still here late at night, or why are you working on the weekends? And so we would talk to people and they'd say, oh, I was busy all day. And I got to the end of the day and I didn't have time for that one big thing I needed to do. And we said, well, what did you do all day? And they were rushing to meetings and they were answering emails and they were just like doing stuff, that made them look busy, but wasn't really the core of their work. And so that's when I began to think of work in sort of three ways. I think of it in concentric circles. There's the core work that is probably where you create the most value for your organization and gives you the most fulfillment. And that's really where we want to be spending our time and our energy. And then there's what I call the work around the work, the emails and the Slack and the meetings and all of that kind of stuff. And that's where we can often get tripped up, where we spend all of our time. All of that should be in service to that real work, but oftentimes that's what becomes the work. I mean, I've seen people who spend their days putting together beautiful, like Asana charts and Notion things and like all charting out all the work that they need to do. And then at the end of the day, they haven't done any work, but they've it feels like work, but it's not real work. And then there's the third concentric circle that I call the performance of work. So when you're in these hustle cultures, these busyness cultures, you are going to go to every meeting. You're going to be answering emails late. You're going to be on Slack late because you want to perform. You want to show that you are this ideal worker. And again, that doesn't necessarily lead to that core value work that gives you a sense of fulfillment. And so that is the most important thing. And what was wild, I wanted to understand like the short work hours movement, because if we're so stuck in like rewarding long work hours, how on earth could you possibly do the same work or better in shorter work hours? And so I went very skeptically because listen, I struggle with overwork. I have a whole chapter on my own workaholic tendencies because we're all products of the environment we live in, and I've gotten all those messages and I believe that. And I struggle with that. And so I was really shocked to go and spend a lot of time with organizations and places where they have made an effort to cut their work hours and reward, productive work and reward well-being and work-life balance. And what was fascinating is that they had to completely throw out all of the way they thought about work, all of that busyness, all of that work around the work, and really really get clear on what do we do here? What is our work? And how can we organize all of those systems so it leads to that? And so some of that is then it doesn't matter when you come in. It doesn't matter how long you work. It doesn't matter where you work. It's like, are you doing the most important thing? Are you results oriented? Are you impact oriented? Are you output oriented rather than what we tend to measure and reward, which is input, which is sort of an old factory model of like punching a card and being present. And so that's a lot of what you're seeing also in these return to office fights is sort of this fight to go back to an old input way of working or managing. Like I'm going to walk around and I can see if you're here, you must be doing your work. And my favorite story around that is from my own experience at the Washington Post. I had a friend who was there late and one of the top editors came out of his office and he knew, everybody knew what he said is he valued people who were always there in the office. It was like 11 o'clock at night. And the editor comes out and he says, I know who the best reporters are because they're still here. And my friend who was exhausted and was there like working on a project, sort of like a one-off, looked around. Half the people there were playing solitaire. They were not working. They were not doing that core, important, valuable work. They were looking like they were working. They were performing work because they knew that's what the boss would reward. And what were they doing in the meantime? They were giving up their own lives. They were damaging their own relationships. And to your point, to their health. So that was sort of a huge part of what I wanted to understand. And then to your point of trying to understand, well, what are the consequences then of all of this overwork? I found really terrifying work stress and health studies that I don't understand why people are not screaming in the streets about. And they looked at what they called 10 psychosocial stressors at work. So not falling off a ladder and not like, inhaling coal dust, sort of like that you would think of as work hazards.
Yeah.
But things like long work hours, toxic bosses, feeling like you're unappreciated and that you're working harder than the rewards that you're getting. All of these things that pretty much everybody experiences, if not every day, at least every week or at some point. And what they found is those 10 psychosocial stressors lead to so much either acute stress, acute illness, like you get so stressed you have a heart attack or a stroke in the moment, or chronic stress over time, where you get so exhausted that you come home from a long day and you're like, oh, I can't work out and I'm just going to get takeout. I'm too tired to, eat something healthy. And so then that over time, that can lead to diabetes or, obesity or cardiovascular disease. So both of those acute and chronic work-related stress has actually made work in the United States the 5th leading cause of death. I
Wow.
mean, people should, we should be paying attention to this because,
Yeah.
you mentioned well-being. We need to treat people as the precious resources they are and not widgets.
What I liked about that chapter in your book, and for those who are planning to read the book, it's in the very beginning, so you'll get to it very quickly. Unlike our interview, we left it to the last. But I liked the idea in your book when you said that in Japan, they have the word for work-related death, karoshi. And I think it's very nice when we find words for phenomena, because then these phenomena become real. And yes, it's a pity that in English we don't have the word for that, because this is a real thing. What I want to ask, and I hope, yes, we still have a bit of time. What I want to ask, also, since I'm already in the topic of the book, in the end of the book, you will find some appendicitis. I don't know how to appendixes.
Three.
English is my third language. Sorry.
Well, that's a very impressive. I mean, I'm so impressed.
Thank you. So, in the end of the book, you will find wonderful resources for you to actually take back for yourself what you as a human being can do, because we might feel very helpless in this situation. Also, maybe evaluate how bad an impact could your work have on you. Now, talking about what we can do. But in the system where everybody's playing by these rules, it's sometimes so hard to break them. So if you know that people are staying late in the office just to show that they're busy, it takes a child to yell out, "The king is naked."
Yes.
How do you break it?
No, that's a really good point. And so at the end of the book, I want to be very helpful. It's not a self-help book. It's really a book of journalism. But I think what's important is that I think of the way that I work is at the intersection of personal transformation and systems change, because at the end of the day, really all we can control is our own thoughts, behaviors, and actions. And yet that can have ripple effects on the system. And one of the things that's so important as we think about personal transformation is understanding the system that we're working in and being aware of it. That the first step to any change is awareness. And so that's a lot of why I bring in systems, so that you can understand and then you can figure out, okay, how can I interact here? If you are an individual, with your own, you can start with your own sort of success, redesign like they do in the short work hours movements. Get really clear on what's the most important work that you do. What do you get the most fulfillment from? What is the most value you're creating for your work or your organization? And I think when you're an individual, what's really important is being able to communicate that. Communicate that clearly and communicate your value and what you're doing to a manager or a boss who may be kind of stuck in that other mindset. Because I've seen people change. I've seen kind of eyes can open. If you're a manager, even on a small team, you can do the same with your team, kind of go through that same success kind of transformation. What is your core work? How can you get your systems to line up to that what's the language that you use with each other? If somebody's leaving in the middle of the day, it's like, oh, nice, must be nice, to more like, is there something you need? Really make it focused on the output, and thinking about how you can, even in your language, make that clear. So it's not about whether you're sitting in an office or putting in long hours, but what are you doing? What value have you brought? What new idea do you have? And really, in your conversation, talking about the importance of rest and being exposed to life outside of work, because that's going to make your work better. But that's not why I want you to do it. I want you to do it because it's quality of life. But that's something that you can communicate. I think, one of the things I would say to people, because I know that a lot of people are in pain, and like, well, what can I do tomorrow? One thing that I would say is not only to value yourself, value your work, and also your rest, your care, your fullness of life. But really think very, very intentionally about how you schedule your day. Because in these busyness cultures, we have this tendency to kind of cram our calendars full, like we're rewarded for that. Oh my goodness, look at how busy I was. And some of the best advice I ever got was from a behavioral scientist. And he said, instead of thinking about your calendar like a pantry that you have to cram like back to back to back with stuff, think about it more like an art gallery. So that requires time to kind of like pause and think, what's most important? What's the one thing I'm going to pay attention to? And create space, white space before and after it. So before you prepare, when you're like looking at that beautiful piece of art, you're fully present. You're not at a meeting and answering emails so that you don't remember anything that's happening, which is what a lot of people do. Be fully present. Do the thing. Recognize that human beings have limited attention spans. So do it for 30, 45, no more than 90 minutes, and then come off and have a break. Have white space to be able to, if there was something you needed to follow up on or synthesize, give yourself pauses through the day, and then it's not going to feel quite so much like a treadmill.
I love the idea of the art gallery. It's a very good visual, and I think the idea that I'm getting out for myself is that it starts with us. And as much, I mean, I've been in personal growth for 20 something years now, 22, 23. Cognitively, I understand that's important, but yet I still pat myself on the back when I've had a busy day and I feel I've done well. Or feel guilty for putting my professional life on hold for my daughter's transition into a different schooling system. So thank you for that. I want to repeat once again to you guys, Overwork, Brigit Schulte. You can find it. Probably Masha will share a link with you, but this is the book. And we have only touched upon some of the topics in the book. There is so much more. I know that there are very interesting conversations about Iceland and Scotland and the bright future, what is possible. This book is actually, although it does make you think, feel, maybe be uncomfortable and maybe sometimes angry, it does give you the light at the end of the tunnel. So there are so many topics we didn't have chance to touch upon in this interview. I hope this interview is mostly a taster for you to go deeper and actually read it for yourself, because it's an empowering book. And I think since it starts with us, we have to continue this conversation as a society and stop judging people for prioritizing their family life and their personal life and their hobbies and other things in life. I want to do the traditional thing, ask my guests who are live right now to leave a heart for Brigid in the chat. And if you're watching it in recording, because most people are watching it actually in recording, leave a heart in the comments below the video. All the love matters. And I'll ask my favorite question to Brigid in the end of the book, although you might have answered that already several times, but I have to ask it. How would you want your book to change the world?
Yeah. That's the reason why I do this work. I want to change the world. I want all people to feel like they have rich, full, wholehearted lives and meaningful work, time for love and care and connection, and also time to play and joy. That's what I'm hoping.
That we get to live a human life. Thank you so much. And thank you, our reading enthusiasts, for joining our interviews, for following our books, for reading the books. Yeah, if you're not part of Mindvalley Book Club, then sign up. We do weekly reviews of the new releases that we find most interesting and most promising. And then once a week, we invite one of the authors that we find even still the more interesting to our interviews. By the way, Brigid, I didn't mention that, but you are the book of the week by Mindvalley this week.
Oh, thank you. That's exciting.
Yes, it's actually a very big thing because we go through hundreds of books every week. So it's a very very thick filter. So
I'm very, very honored. Thank you so much. I'm so
it's it's a great book and a very important conversation. So follow Mindvalley Book Club, come to our interviews, and yes, I hope I'll see you next week. Bye bye.